Nearly a month after Kyle Busch died, the tributes were still coming. Drivers, team owners, sponsors, media personalities, everyone had something to say about who Rowdy was, what he meant to the sport, how much they appreciated him, and how much they were going to miss him. And then Tony Stewart walked up to a reporter at Bristol Dragway ahead of the NHRA Thunder Valley Nationals and said something nobody was expecting. Not a tribute. Not a tearful memory, not a carefully worded statement about legacy. What came out of Stewart's mouth was raw, direct, and aimed straight at the NASCAR world. He was not there to eulogize Kyle Busch. He was there to call people out. To understand why Stewart said what he said, you have to understand who Kyle Busch actually was, because there were two versions of him, and most people only ever saw one. The version the public saw was Rowdy, the angry radio transmissions after a bad pit stop, the post-race confrontations, the rivalry with Dale Earnhardt Jr., that got so heated at Richmond in 2008 that Kyle had to be escorted out of the facility, the booze thrown at his car, the years of being the villain that fans loved to hate. Every week, no matter where NASCAR raced, when Kyle Busch showed up, there was a reaction, and a lot of the time, that reaction was booing. He was polarizing in a way very few drivers ever reach. He was loud, competitive, brutally honest, and at times impossible to separate from the controversy that seemed to follow him everywhere. But inside the garage, the people who worked alongside him saw something completely different. They saw a two-time Cup Series champion who understood racing at a level almost no one else did. They saw a teammate who pushed everyone around him to be better. They saw a husband, a father, a team owner who built Kyle Busch Motorsports from scratch and won 100 races with it between 2010 and 2023, producing Cup stars in the process. And they saw a racer who, even when things got hard at Richard Childress Racing in the final years of his career, never stopped grinding, never stopped putting in the work in the simulator, never stopped believing he could find his way back to victory lane. Kyle Busch drove for 3 Hall of Fame team owners across his career. He started with Hendrick Motorsports from 2005 to 2007, then made the move to Joe Gibbs Racing in 2008, where he spent 15 seasons and became the face of Toyota's NASCAR program. He won both of his Cup championships at JGR in 2015 and 2019. He left after 2022 and joined Richard Childress Racing, taking over the number 8 Chevrolet. By the time he died, his career numbers were staggering. 234 total wins across all 3 NASCAR National Series, the most in history. 63 Cup Series wins, ranking 9th all-time. 102 victories in the O'Reilly Auto Parts Series. 69 wins in the Craftsman Truck Series. Numbers that no one in the sport has come close to matching. His last win came on the 15th of May, 2026 in the Truck Series at Dover. 6 days before he died, Kyle Busch stood in victory lane one final time. And when a reporter asked him why wins never got old, he said, "Because you never know when the last one is." No one understood at the time just how right he was. What happened to Kyle Busch in the days before his death on the 21st of May 2026 is a story that still shocks people when they hear the full timeline. He had been dealing with what appeared to be a sinus cold during the race at Watkins Glen on May 10, radioing his team during the race to say he needed a doctor's shot afterward. He bounced back, ran the Truck Series race at Dover the following Friday, won it, then competed in the All-Star race on Sunday. To everyone around him, including Brad Keselowski, who later said he had noticed Kyle was under the weather but had mentally moved on after watching him win at Dover, Kyle seemed like he had pushed through whatever was bothering him. He had not. On Wednesday, May 20, Kyle Busch was using the Chevrolet Racing Simulator at the GM Charlotte Technical Center in Concord, North Carolina, when he became unresponsive. A 911 call placed at 5:32 p.m. described a man who was coughing up blood, had shortness of breath, was overheating, and looked like he was going to pass out. He was on the bathroom floor, still awake, when emergency responders arrived. He was transported to Atrium Health, Carolina's medical center in Charlotte. Hours later, his team announced he would not compete in the Coca-Cola 600. And then, on Thursday, May 21, his family announced that Kyle Busch had died. He was 41 years old. The death certificate, obtained later by the Charlotte Observer and The Athletic, confirmed that Kyle Busch had been dealing with bacterial pneumonia for days to weeks before his death. The pneumonia progressed into sepsis, which lasted 1 day. The sepsis triggered disseminated intravascular coagulation, causing abnormal clotting throughout his blood vessels, which then led to hemorrhagic shock. His body had been fighting an infection serious enough to kill him while he was still winning races and preparing to run at Charlotte. He was cremated in Mooresville, North Carolina. Richard Childress Racing announced immediately that they would be retiring the number 8 until Kyle's son Brexton, who turned 11 the day before his father died, was old enough to go NASCAR racing. NASCAR made the decision to remove Kyle Busch from the Cup Series points standings out of respect for his family. Before his death, he had been 23rd in points, with 217 points through 12 races, still fighting for results in a car that had struggled to match the dominance of his JGR years. The moment the news broke, the tributes started and they did not stop. Denny Hamlin, who had been Kyle's teammate at JGR for years, called him the most talented and gifted race car driver that ever stepped in a car. Brad Keselowski said it was an absolute shock and that life was fragile. Dale Earnhardt Jr. posted about how the two of them had worked to patch up a famously difficult relationship, writing that Kyle had actually been the one to initiate a conversation about how they each managed their teams. Ryan Blaney described him as a larger-than-life person in racing. Austin Dillon wrote one of the most personal statements of anyone in the sport, detailing how Kyle had gone from the enemy his family never wanted to lose to someone who became family inside RCR. Joe Gibbs Racing released a statement calling Kyle a fierce competitor, an incredible teammate, and, far more importantly, a devoted husband, father, and son. NASCAR CEO Steve O'Donnell stood in front of a crowd at Charlotte Motor Speedway before the Coca-Cola 600 and said simply, "Kyle Busch is NASCAR. He was one of a kind. There will never be another." Wall-to-wall praise, non-stop tributes. People who had spent years criticizing him, booing him, dismissing him, or keeping their distance were now standing in line to talk about what a remarkable human being he was. And that is exactly what sent Tony Stewart over the edge. Stewart was approached by a reporter at Bristol Dragway who wanted to know how Kyle Busch should be remembered. What came next was not what anyone was asking for, and it was not what anyone expected. I guess the biggest thing in this tragedy that's happened that pisses me off the most is that now everybody wants to talk about how he was as a person, Stewart said. Outside of that, all they wanted to do is judge what they saw on TV. It's frustrating. That's the way every one of us are judged by what they see on TV, and then once you die, they want to talk about how good a person you were. That's the part that pisses me off the most about it right now. He was not finished. Should have given him a chance to learn him as a person before they judged him in the first place. So right now, I don't care about educating everybody about how Kyle Busch was. I know who Kyle Busch was. The fact that they all want to learn now, they're the expletives for not taking the time to learn him and accept him for who he was back then. You want to wait until a guy dies and then care about who he was as a person? That's the part that pisses me off about everybody. That statement did not come from someone disconnected from the situation. Stewart and Busch had been rivals since 2005 when Kyle entered the Cup Series with Hendrick. They competed against each other from 2005 to 2016. With genuine friction, Kyle wrecked Stewart at Las Vegas in 2006, And Stewart turned Kyle into the wall on the final lap at Daytona in 2009. But when Kyle joined Stewart at Joe Gibbs Racing in 2008 for one season before Stewart left to start Stewart-Haas Racing, something shifted. Stewart got to see Kyle away from the cameras, away from the headlines, away from the rowdy persona that the TV cameras captured every Sunday. Stewart also released a written tribute that made his respect crystal clear. He wrote, "Kyle Busch was a fierce competitor. He was strong-willed, confident, not only in his ability behind the wheel, but in his opinions. He held his own and didn't mince words. Early on, we didn't always see eye to eye, but in 2008, he became my teammate at Joe Gibbs Racing, and he was a great teammate. He pushed me to be better, and we always had respect for one another." It was easy to see that Kyle was going to be a future champion. He added, "Whether it was to see him win or to see someone beat him, you watched. Even the haters will miss Kyle. They'll learn in the coming weeks who he was as a person, a husband, and a father." Weeks before the Bristol Dragway comments, Stewart had been photographed at the Potomac Nationals at Maryland International Raceway, wearing a hat with Kyle's number 8 on it. This was not a man who did not care. This was a man who was grieving and grieving with anger. The reason Stewart's words carried weight beyond just being controversial is that he was not speaking from the outside looking in. Tony Stewart had lived the exact same narrative that Kyle Busch lived. He was Smoke, the hothead, the driver with the temper that could flip from charming to explosive without warning, the guy who had his own confrontations, his own angry interviews, his own moments of being the villain that fans and media picked apart. Stewart understood better than almost anyone in NASCAR what it felt like to be watched through a television screen and reduced to a character. The difference in June 2026 is that Stewart is still alive to say it. Kyle Busch is not. And that is where Stewart's rage transforms into something more than frustration. It becomes grief. Because the chance to know Kyle, to appreciate him, to tell him directly that you saw more than the booing and the controversy, that chance is gone. Not everyone received Stewart's comments the way he may have intended them. The Outkick piece covering his remarks called them puzzling, baffling, and tone-deaf. Fans on social media and forums were divided. One fan wrote, "He should apologize." Another pushed back on Stewart's premise directly, "Tony, sorry for you to find out, but all of us common people didn't have an opportunity to know him like all you privileged people and competitors got to know him. Getting to see you on TV is what we get to see. So put that in your pipe and smoke it." A third raised a point that cut both ways. He has a point, but the problem is his friends weren't telling anyone how great he was while he was alive. That last point deserves to sit there for a moment because it is fair, and it is complicated. The counter-argument to Stewart's entire position is also grounded in facts. Kyle Busch was not universally disliked in his final years. When he moved to Richard Childress Racing in 2023, something shifted with the fan base. When he started from the pole at the 2026 Daytona 500, the crowd was loud and it was cheering. Reporters who were on site confirmed that the reception Kyle received in his RCR years was dramatically warmer than the booing that defined his JGR era. Fans had, arguably, already been doing the work of seeing past the TV villain by the time he died. That is the tension at the center of Stewart's argument, and it is why the debate his comments sparked has not died down. But step back from the debate and look at the larger picture Stewart is describing, and there is something undeniable there. NASCAR has always run on personalities. Dale Earnhardt Sr. was polarizing. Tony Stewart was polarizing. Kyle Busch was polarizing, and in every single case, the sport booed them when they were active and mourned them as irreplaceable when they were gone. Kyle was one of the last drivers in the sport who had no filter. He did not protect his image. He did not give polished answers. He did not play the media game the way the modern sports world demands. That made him controversial. It also made him real, and it also made him one of the most watchable drivers the sport has ever had. Stewart's real message was not a lecture. It was a challenge. The next time a difficult personality shows up in NASCAR, the next driver who says the wrong thing, races too hard, refuses to smile for the cameras, and gets booed every week, Stewart is asking whether people will wait until that person is gone to figure out who they actually were. Kyle Busch's own words, spoken in Victory Lane at Dover on May 15, 6 days before he died, are the ones that stay with you. When asked why wins never got old, he said, "Because you never know when the last one is." Tony Stewart is furious because too many people are only now realizing how true that sentence was and how much it applied to more than just race wins.